and as I said last week, since we didn't learn in these cycle of classes about Purim yet, so we will go into depth about Purim. It's also a practical class, and also uh, a general knowledge class. Um, and so we will, most of the class will be, of course, laws that we can practice from a week and a half from now. And in the end, we will talk also about kinds of different Purim situations that we will not face this year. But it's still very important to know about for next year's. So we will start right away. I always debate if a better way is to have this screen sharing, so the content will be clear, or if it's better to speak with everybody seeing everybody else and without the content. So if anybody has specific views on that, they can write in the chat, but for now we'll do it this way. So Purim is approaching. Just for the basic knowledge, the word Purim is from the word pur in Hebrew, which means casting. Now I forgot the word in English, so it doesn't mean a lot. Anybody remembers the word in English for pur? To cast the like a lottery. And the reason is because Haman, we read in the Megillah that Haman, for knowing which day would it be that that all the people in the kingdom of Achashverosh will kill us, he cast a lottery, and he took out a month and he took out a day, and it turned out to be the 13th of the month of Adar. We talked last week about the fact that it turned out to be Adar, and Haman was happy because he knew that Adar was the month that Moshe passed away, and the Gemara says ironically that Haman knew that Moshe passed away on the month of Adar, but he didn't know that Moshe was also born on the month of Adar, and the same day, actually, on the 7th of Adar, which will take place this week. And so but anyway, he cast a lottery, which in Hebrew is called Pur, and that's why those days are Purim. And the idea of the lottery, idea of putting things into chance, or at least seemingly having chance in the world, knowing that God works in ways that are not always clear, that seem like it's coincidence or like it's chance, but it's not. This is a very deep part of what Purim is. So just I wanted to say that about the name of Purim. And another part about the name of Purim, maybe we'll talk about it next week, that the Gemara has a very famous drasha, Purim Kippurim. We have Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim, the day that we ask forgiveness in the beginning of the year, right after Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. In our sources, it is called Yom HaKippurim, and the difference between Purim and Kippurim is the kaf, Kippurim. And in Hebrew, this kaf in the beginning sometimes is a way to is a way to say something is like something. Ke. I would say this is ke. I don't know what kind of example. Yeah, something is like something else. I would say ze ke ze. That is ke that. This cup seems like my cup in my house, so it'll be hakos azot hi ke kakos shali, or any other example. I hope I'm clear, but this idea of the sages is very, very unique, saying that Yom Kippurim, the highest day almost in Judaism, is only just like Purim. So Purim is the thing itself. Yom Kippurim is like Purim. And also in that sense, there are many, many ideas and Torah and Chassidut and thoughts about what it makes Purim such a big day, a huge day in Jewish tradition, that the Gemara says that Yom Kippur is like Purim. But this is really, we believe that this is a day of an atonement as well. And we will talk about all of that hopefully next week. This week we will be a little more practical and more informative. So right before Purim, the day before Purim, the 13th of Adar, which will be a Sunday, it will be next Sunday, Monday, a week, a day and a week from now. That's a day of fasting, Ta'anit Esther. Actually, I just want to clarify that in the Megillah, there is a story about Esther fasting when she prayed to God so that the bad fate that Haman is planning will not come to pass. But she didn't fast on the 13th of Adar. The 13th of Adar was actually the day when Haman decided that was the day for all the Jews to be fighted against and extinguished. And we celebrate Purim on the 14th because this is the day that we were saved. This is the day that we could rest after, in the 13th, the Jews fought against anybody who wanted to kill them and won and succeeded. And then the 14th was a day of happiness and of thankfulness to God for saving us. So Ta'anit Esther, the name Ta'anit Esther, as a day of fasting of Esther, is a little bit confusing. It's not the day that Esther fasted in the Megillah, but it is the day that we are remembering the terrible danger that all of the people of Israel were in. If not for the Megillah and if not for the help of Hashem, God Almighty, the 13th of Adar would have been the day that the Jews were extinct. So this fasting day is a very serious day, and it's called Ta'anit Esther probably because our sages wanted to connect those two things together. Even though Esther fasted on a different day, and she asked also the people of Israel to fast on a different day, we call the day before Purim, the day of the war, Ta'anit Esther. And that's how we're connecting those two things. One is that we are remembering the danger that we were in and the serious chance that we could have been extinguished that day, but we are also putting in what can we do? What can we do? We need to do what Esther told us all to do, to fast and to pray to God and cry and ask God to save us. And after we do that, after we dedicate that day for fasting and praying and asking God for mercy, of course we can celebrate on Purim in a much deeper sense. So that's the fast of Esther. The fast of Esther is one of the lower fasts. It's not as strong as Tisha B'Av and the 17th of Tammuz and 10th of Tevet. It's one of the lower fasts. So, of course, women who are breastfeeding should not fast, and people who feel bad that the fast is it would be very, very hard for them. Of course, they should ask a rabbi to describe exactly their situation. If it's a little bit hard, you still should fast, but it's not as strong fast as the other strong fasts that we have during the year. As I said, the fast starts from the morning, so you don't have to. It's not like Tisha B'Av where you start fasting from the night, only from sunrise. And yeah, you don't eat, you don't drink. There are no other limits. It's not like Tisha B'Av and Shiva Asar B'Tammuz that we have 5 things that we're not allowed. Not in Tanita still. So that's Tanita still. It's the day before Purim, and actually, even though according to Halacha, the day switches at sunset, so theoretically we could have eaten, or from when the stars come out, we could have started to eat when the 3 stars come out, just like the Shabbat. On Purim, we don't eat and drink until the end of the Megillah reading. And this is important. The Megillah reading is what starts Purim, and then we're starting to eat and drink. Of course, someone who feels in a big exhaustion, or they feel very weak, and it will be hard for them to read the Megillah. So you could drink at least, or eat something small after the 3 stars have come out, after the time of the Shabbat going out on the calendar. But if you can wait, it's important to wait until after the Megillah reading. The times of Purim, I'm going with the list here on the left, so you can all see where we're going. So regarding the times of Purim, it's not as relevant to you right now, but it's important to anybody who needs to know something about Purim, and who plans to someday go live in Israel, hopefully. In the Megillah, there are 2 days of celebrating Purim, 2 different days for Jews who live in 2 different kinds of cities or settlements. The Megillah tells that those who lived in the outskirts, those who lived in the suburbs, were attacked on the 14th of Adar, on the 13th of Adar, and therefore they fought on the 13th of Adar, and they were free to celebrate on the 14th. But in Shushan, the capital of Achashverosh, there were fightings and wars going on also on the 14th of Adar, and only on the 15th of Adar were the Jews able to sit down and relax and feel and celebrate their redemption. And that's why in Shushan they celebrated Purim on the 15th of Adar and not on the 14th of Adar. And the Megillah itself says already that every city that is like Shushan, in the sense that it is a city that there's a big wall around it, they celebrate on the 15th. And the rest of the cities and the settlements, anywhere any city who's not surrounded by a wall, celebrates on the 14th. Our sages say that the rule is, and this is very interesting, I won't get into the deep meaning of it, why is it, but our sages say that any city that had a wall around it since the days of Yehoshua bin Nun, since the day of this great man who led us into Israel after Moses passed away in the desert before getting into Israel, Yehoshua bin Nun. He was our leader right after Moshe, right after Moses. When in a city that had a wall around it on that time has to celebrate Purim on the 15th. The rest need to celebrate Purim on the 14th. Now, how many cities can we know about that had a wall surrounding it from the times of Yehoshua bin Nun? So Jerusalem is one of it, not because it's our capital, just because it's an old city, a very, very old city that a wall was surrounding it since those times, as well as Shushan, the capital of Achashverosh. But there are very, very few places all over the world that celebrate Purim on the 15th. And today, I think, beside Jerusalem and Hebron, who also had a wall around it in the time of Yehoshua bin Nun, I don't think at least as much as I know, there are no cities who celebrate Purim on the 15th. So just make sure you're aware, if you happen to be in Jerusalem on the time of Purim, they are not celebrating Purim on the 14th. They have Ta'anit Esther on the 13th of Adar. They have a day off, which many Jerusalem people either go outside of Jerusalem to celebrate Purim with their friends, or take this day to prepare Mishloach Manot. And then only on the 14th at night do the Jerusalem people read the Megillah. So you should know it and remember it. And of course, if you come somehow to Shushan in Iran, so you should do the same. And there are different places that are debated upon, places that are on the outskirts of Jerusalem. How much is Jerusalem going? How far does Jerusalem go to be considered Jerusalem in terms of when you celebrate Purim? Those are questions that are debated. And if you happen to come to the Jerusalem area on Purim time, make sure to ask. If you're in Jerusalem, you don't have to ask. Just prepare yourself to celebrate Purim on the 15th. If you're somewhere close to Jerusalem, make sure to ask if that place celebrates on the 14th or on the 15th. So this is about the times of Purim. And I just want to say a joke. There's a joke about one of a famous philosopher in Israel who was also a religious person. His name is Yeshayahu Leibovich, and he was very known for his strict intellectuality. And he didn't like Purim so much for several reasons that I think we will talk about today. Especially, I assume, the drinking and the festivities. And he made sure on the 14th to be in Jerusalem, and on the 15th to go out of Jerusalem. So that way he could stay in Israel and never celebrate Purim. I am pretty sure that this is not a true story, but it's something that it's a famous story that goes around. So this is the times of Purim. Now, something short about the costumes. There's no mitzvah to wear costumes. It's not written anywhere. It's a beautiful custom that the people sort of brought it up, and some Some academics think that it came from other nations' um, celebrations. It's not a purely Jewish tradition. So if you don't have a costume, don't worry. It's not a mitzvah. But there is already 500 years ago, there were rabbis who wrote that this has become a big custom, a famous custom, and that if it has become such a big custom in the Jewish tradition, then it has something holy to it. And so I believe personally that having costumes is not only for children, and there's a deep, very, very deep meaning behind it. There's a whole story about the masks and the fact that God is not appearing in the Megillah at all. The name of God is not in the Megillah, and still we see very obviously that he is there in almost every turn of the story. And so God is putting a costume on himself, and we are as well putting a costume on ourselves in order to be able to celebrate Purim to the fullest, when we are giving up a little bit our holding tight, and having a costume helps with that very much. So on one hand, I'm saying don't think it's a mitzvah. It's not a holy thing in the sense that it's a requirement of Purim, and it's not something that you have to, you can celebrate Purim without having a costume. On the other hand, I'm saying I don't think it's just a childish thing. It's a deep thing that I think could bring a huge meaning for anybody who does it on Purim. And I make sure to dress up very well every Purim. The older I am, the more I dress up. So I urge you to do the same. Now we will get to the mitzvahs of Purim, which are the main thing in Purim. Okay. So there are 4 mitzvahs of Purim, 4 important mitzvahs of Purim, which without them, we didn't perform the duty of how to perform Purim. And those, at least 3 of them, are written in the Megillah itself. Does anybody want to read the source from the Megillah?
I can read.
Yes, please.
20. Now Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews living throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far 21, listening them.
You don't have to read the numbers. That's just
Okay.
the numbers of the verses.
Okay. And to obligate themselves to celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, like the days upon which the Jews were relieved of their enemies, and the month which had been transformed for them from one of sorrow to joy, from mourning to festivity, to make them days of feasting, rejoicing, sending food portions one to another, and giving gifts to the poor. And the Jews accepted that which they had been begun to observe, and that which Mordecai had written to them.
Thank you very much. So the Megillah states that it was decided that on the day that the Jews were relieved from their enemies, they will do three things: feasting, feasting, rejoicing. Here I see in the translation it's two different things, which makes sense in a sense, but it's the same area of having a meal, feasting and rejoicing, sending food portions to one another, and giving gifts to the poor. So those are three things that we will go over them. The fourth thing is to read this Megillah that we are reading. We can't know what are the three mitzvahs of Purim if we're not reading the Megillah, right? So the fourth mitzvah is to read the Megillah. And we will talk about that mitzvah as well. And we will talk also about side issues. It's not the four main mitzvot of Purim, but it's important to know the prayer, the things that we add in the prayer of Purim. And I just want to point out, you see number 23, or verse number 23, and the Jews accepted as an obligation that which they had begun to observe, and that which Mordechai had written to them. So this is something that actually circulates around the essence of Purim. Purim is the only holiday. I'm putting Chanukah aside for a minute because Chanukah doesn't have a mitzvot in it. We have Ner Chanukah, but it's not. First of all, it's not written in our basic sources in our Bible, but it's not. It's also, it didn't get to the same level of obligation of Purim. Purim is actually maybe the only holiday that is not written in the Torah and has a status of a Torah festival. And the Talmud speaks about how this is because the Jews accepted that. Yeah, it was something that the Jews accepted, and we turned it into our obligation and to our mitzvah. And that's part of why Purim is such an incredible holiday, because it's ours. We had a miracle. We were saved by God in absolutely natural ways. As I said, God is not in the Megillah. He's not performing actions that are revealing himself, that are revealing his that he works in reality. But we know it's God, and we are celebrating that, and we took upon ourselves this mitzvah, and therefore that's one of the reasons that Purim is such a special time, such a special holiday. And it goes all the way that the Talmud says, actually, that when we received the Torah on Mount Sinai, that was the first receiving of the Torah, and that was a receiving that we were forced to receive. God said, either you're receiving the Torah, you're accepting it, or I'm going to kill you. And Purim is the second receiving of the Torah. And this is the receiving out of will. It's the people of Israel's initiative to take upon themselves an obligation of keeping a mitzvah that God didn't ask them to keep. And this is a new level in the relationship between the people of Israel and God. And this is one of the reasons why Purim is such an incredible day. So after we just went through this, we will go into each mitzvah a little bit more in depth. Okay, so the first thing that we do is the Megillah reading. The Megillah should be read after 3 stars have come out. It would be more or less the time of when Shabbat got out, the previous Shabbat. But look in your calendars, and of course, it's extremely important to come to the synagogue and to hear it with as many Jews as possible. It's a day of celebration together. And as I said, we're not supposed to eat until after the Megillah unless we feel very, very, very hard with not eating. The Megillah has to be read from Klaf. Here's you can see the picture of the Klaf. Of course, that if you are coming to the synagogue, then you don't have to be troubled with that. That would be the trouble of the reader to get a Megillah with Klaf. If you can't come to the synagogue for whatever reason, and again, I stress, you should find all the means that you can to come and to bring your children as well. But if for some reason you can't in no way come to the synagogue, then try to find a Megillah of Klaf, and you can also borrow if if you're stuck. I had this case a few times. I was stuck because my son was sick or because there were other reasons, and I took Megillah from someone after they finished reading, and I read it by myself with Klaf. I didn't get along only with the Chumash or with the book that is paper, because it's important to read from the Klaf. The mitzvah is for men and women. There's no separation here. It's not that the men are more obligated than the women. So any kind of what some families do, that the men are in the synagogue and the women are taking care of the children, it's not the case here. Families should find a way to for the men and the women to hear all of the Megillah. And in many communities, they will have two readings, one for the first shift and one for the second shift. And if that's not the case, and you see that you can't share because you have small children or for whatever reason, for whatever other reason, you should go to the rabbi in your community and say that that you need another reading to read to hear the Megillah, because it's not more the obligation of the men than the women. So it's important to know that. The mitzvah of the Megillah is also in the night and also in the day. It's not that we have one time obligation to hear the Megillah. It's two separate mitzvot. So we must make sure to hear it also at the night when Purim starts. And then after that, in the morning, after Shacharit, we read the Megillah again, and we say the blessings again. And actually, according to our Scandinavian Nusach, we say Shehecheyanu both times on the Megillah. Even though we read the Megillah in the evening, also in the morning we say Shehecheyanu, because it's another mitzvah. And that's why it's important to hear the Megillah also at night and also in the day. Reading the Megillah is what brings us into Purim. If we won't read the Megillah, we won't relive the story. The celebration would be empty in a way. It would be hollow. We fill in the celebration. It's not just a celebration for the sake of celebrating. It's a celebration for the sake of our redemption in the days of Achashverosh. So it's important to read the Megillah night and day. In most communities, the person who reads says before the Megillah that he is concentrating on reading for everybody, so everybody will perform the mitzvah of reading the Megillah through the reader. And we have to also concentrate on performing the mitzvah through the reader, because the mitzvah is not to hear the Megillah, is to read the Megillah. And that's why it's also important that we will have a book, that we will see the words and the letters and try and read with the reader. because our mitzvah is to read the Megillah, not only hear it. Of course, in many circumstances, there's someone that knows to read better than us, and if we will read it, it won't be as clear even to us. So that's why we have a reader. But it's important also to have the kavanah, to have the concentration. I am going to perform this mitzvah through the reader, and also to read with him. So that's about that. The blessings. We have 3 blessings before reading the Megillah. You can see it in front of you. We're reading Al Mikra Megillah. That's what I said before. We're not blessing to hear the Megillah, Lishmoa Megillah, but to read the Megillah, Al Mikra Megillah. This is our blessing. The second blessing is She'asa Nisim La'avotenu Bayamim Hahem Bazman Hazeh, a blessing that could be familiar to you also from Chanukah. We're blessing that God did miracles to our forefathers on these days, on this time. On those days, on this time, meaning it happened many years ago, but it's in this time of the year, and that's why we're celebrating. And Shehecheyanu, which we're saying on every new thing. And this is a new mitzvah that we didn't do since last year. So we're saying Shehecheyanu. After the Megillah reading, there's one blessing, Harav et Rivenu. And this is also, the reader will say this blessing, but we have to say it also quietly. After that blessing, there is a poem that everybody reads, Asher Heni Atzat Goim. It's a fairly long poem written with the Aleph Beit. Every line is another letter in the Aleph Beit. It's sometimes confusing. That's why I'm saying it here, because sometimes people hear the Megillah and then think they're finished and they don't understand what are the people around them mumbling. So you should have a Megillah that contains, or a book that contains also the blessings, just so you know that there are blessings that are said after the Megillah. And the end of this poem, you see that I brought in the Aleph, the line of the Aleph, Asher Heni Atzat Goim, and then there's a line for Bet, and a line for Gimel, and a line for Daled. Beautiful poem, by the way. Beautiful also language and also ideas behind it. You should look into it. At the end of the poem, you see I brought Shin and Taf, which is a little more famous. Shoshanat Yaakov Tzala V'Samecha Birotam Yachad Tchelet Mordechai Teshuatam Hayita Lanetzach V'Tikvatam B'Chol Dor Vador. This is Shin and Taf, you see. This is the end of the poem, but there's a continuation that is not exactly part of the poem, but we say it because there is an obligation. In the Talmud, it's written that there is an obligation also to state clearly Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Haman is cursed and Mordechai is blessed. And this is something that we are obligated to state. And that's why this part is also here after we finish Taf. It's part of this poem as well. And it has a deep meaning that we're not feeling bad for asking for the evil to be cursed. It's not so politically correct maybe in our days, but it's important to know that as much as we bless Mordechai and we're happy for the miracles and for the miracles that God gave us, we want to cut off the evil. And cutting off the evil, we will do it next Shabbat, on Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat before Purim. We'll read about the cutting off of Amalek. It's our obligation, and also on Purim, we remember it's important to say also Arur Haman, Haman is cursed, and also Baruch Mordechai. Mordechai is blessed. And maybe we will talk about it also in later today when we get to the drinking part. There is it's very important to hear all the words, and actually it's so important that the halakha says that if you missed a word, you have to hear the Megillah all over again. If it's just one or two words that you missed, what you should do is to say them out loud for yourself. Because as I said, the obligation is for us to read the Megillah. We're just making the reader our messenger. So it counts if you read out loud. If you miss two words, so you just say them out loud. You don't have to shout it. It could be between you and yourself. But to just say the words that you missed out loud and then continue hearing the reader. If something happened, like your child started crying, or someone had to go to the bathroom, I don't know, any kind of situation like this, you will need to hear the Megillah from Klaf again. And here it's I don't know if it's a halakha or just I'll try to describe something that happens in many synagogues. There is a huge conflict here between the wish and also, in a way, the obligation to bring children to Megillah reading. We want them to be in the Megillah reading. It's not only for adults; it's for children as well, and we will touch upon it in the next dot here. But if children are making noise and they're disturbing others from hearing the full Megillah, all the words, then it's also a problem. So there is a balance here that I think nobody completely solved throughout our 2,000 years of having Purim. But also there's no exact law in this. We want to bring the children to the synagogue, but of course, if they are being too noisy and people might lose the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, we should take them out and make sure that the rabbi organizes another Megillah reading for those who missed. And that leads us also to the last point of making noise on Haman. This also is not a mitzvah. It's not written anywhere, and it's again something that the rabbis 500 years ago and 600 years ago are writing, that it's something that somehow became, but it has become a minhag, a custom, a Jewish custom, and therefore it's holy. And it has a status of something that we do. And I hope you see the pattern here, because we talked about Purim itself being something that we as a people took upon ourselves. Then there's the costume that it's a part of Purim, also a new part that is not written even in the Megillah, and the hitting of Haman while reading the Megillah. Purim is full of initiatives. Purim is full of things that we come up being excited about celebrating our holiday, the holiday that we were not ordered to have, but that we took upon ourselves. So I hope you appreciate that pattern. But just to be clear, there is a custom to hit or to make noise when the name of Haman is pronounced in the Megillah, in order to perform the mitzvah of Timche et Zecher Amalek, to diminish the name of Amalek. As I said, we will read about it on Shabbat Zachor, And actually, we will read about it also on Purim. We will get to it. The Torah reading is about the war against Amalek. And so the idea is that even when we say Haman, we silence it. That's the way to show that we are demolishing his name and his memory. So the roots of this minhag are important roots. It's performing a mitzvah from the Torah. But there's a trickiness here, and that's connected to what we said before. Haman is also Amalek. It's also an opportunity to demolish the name of Amalek, but it's also a word in the Megillah. And as a word from the Megillah, we have to hear it, or else we won't perform the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah. And therefore, it's important also to make sure that you hear the word Haman before we start going about with the noise. And in many places, the reader will say again the name of Haman after the noise lowers down, so nobody will miss any word. And also here it's important, people who are excited about hitting, I hope it's not only children that are excited about hitting. I hope that you are also excited about it and you will do it with all your might and all your force, but we have to stop on time so we won't miss the rest, the end of the pasuk, or the end of the continuation of the Megillah. So we must also prepare our children. Hit away, it's fine, with the groggles or just hitting on the table or clapping hands. But when it's time to stop, you must stop, because we have to hear the continuation of the Megillah. And I wanted to say one more thing about this. I don't remember. Okay, let's move on. Okay. So we heard the Megillah. The Megillah, as I said, is the mitzvah is also at night and also at day. But the other mitzvot, the main time to perform them are on the day, and that is a very a mistake that many people do. They think that having a feast at night, right after Megillah reading at the evening on Purim Eve, is performing the mitzvah of having a feast, or giving mishloach manot after the Megillah reading at the evening is performing the mitzvah of mishloach manot. It could be, if you're stressed, if you don't have any other way to do it at the evening, but you should know that the main mitzvah is to do it in the morning, in the day, not specifically in the morning, in the day. And so if you have a choice to make, either to give mishloach manot in the evening or in the morning, you should go out of your way to do it in the morning and not do it in the evening, even if it's somehow more convenient for you. Of course, if it's impossible, it's better to give it at the night than not giving it all. Mishloach manot in Hebrew, it's sending portions. And what are those portions? This was a source of a lot of not a lot, but some debate in the Talmud, and the conclusion is that it should be food. It should be something that will be for the Purim meal. And actually, originally in the Talmud, the very meal that we are having should come from our friend. So there is a mitzvah of having a meal, which we will talk about soon. And originally, the idea is that any person gets the Purim meal from their friend. And so I am having a feast on something that someone brought to me. and my friend has a feast on something that I brought to them. So I think now the custom is a bit changed. We'll say, I'll talk about it in a second, but just think about the essence of it, how beautiful it is. It's not giving candy to different friends of ours. It's to take one friend that we have a wish for him to celebrate the Purim feast on the meal that we prepared for him. And we're having the feast on the meal that some other friend of ours wanted to dedicate to us. So I think it's a beautiful way to understand Mishloach Manot in the original sense. And actually, strictly speaking, Mishloach Manot doesn't have to be given to more than one person. When you gave Mishloach Manot to one person, you've performed the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. I know that nowadays in many communities, people tend to give Mishloach Manot to all their friends or to many of their friends, and it becomes something that is almost, it takes over Purim, because you have to give to all your friends, and then you have to give also to those who gave you, so you have to give them back. And you're sending, in my childhood in Jerusalem, my mother used to send all of her 5 children, all of us, on bikes. We started preparing different routes to get there and there and there, and to give them and them and them, and then coming back and receiving the Mishloach Manot and bringing them back to my mother. And every time someone gave us Mishloach Manot, we had to give him back Mishloach Manot. It became something that is very sort of polite, maybe even sort of politically correct, very beautiful in the sense of the community that we give to many people. But it became, at least in my childhood, became a source of stress. And many times the rest of the mitzvot were sort of drifting away, because we had to deal all day long with this Mishloach Manot project, and the day before to prepare, I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40 Mishlochei Manot. So that sort of took over Purim. So I don't know what's the situation in your communities, but you should just know that, strictly speaking, if you gave Mishloach Manot to one person, that is enough. You performed the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. The rest is, of course, it could be beautiful and it could be a source of strength, and it's your job to sort of balance between those two things. Another thing about Mishloach Manot, since it's really supposed to be a meal, then it's supposed to be something that 2 different kinds of food, and it should be something that it is cooked, that it is a meal. I know that nowadays many people give out just candy. I make sure when I give Mishlochei Manot, when we give Mishlochei Manot, my wife and I, we usually bake some kind of a small cake, or we do something that is cooked that could be considered a meal. I have friends who give real meals. They give a kugel, or real portions of meal, even if you don't go that far, because it won't be received so well. Make sure to bring something that is cooked, and 2 different types of things. And of course, some kind of drink is also a type of course, according to halakha. So if you give one thing and a bottle of wine, is also good for Mishloach Manot. 2 different kinds of parts of meal in the same Mishloach Manot to one person. This is the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. The rest is extra. Yes, Cecilia.
I wonder, on which day are you doing this? On Ta'anit, when you are fasting, or when?
No. That's what I said. It has to be on the day of Purim. This year, it's Tuesday.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, certainly not in Ta'anit Esther, but what I tried to underline, maybe I wasn't clear, also not on Monday night after the Megillah. If you have no choice, you can do it then, but it's much, much, much more preferable to do it on Purim day, on Tuesday. There is a nice custom. It's not obligatory, but it is written in the halakha books, in the halakha books, that the word mishloach manot, the word mishloach is sending portions, and therefore a nice custom is to give to someone that you want to give mishloach manot, give it through a messenger. And that's why also, at least in Jerusalem, it was this custom of sending your children out, because your children are messengers of you, telling my parents sent with me this mishloach manot. And that's that way, it's a real sending. It's like ordering food on the internet, that you have a messenger who brings you the food. If you don't, it's not obligatory. You don't have to get into trouble if you don't. When I was a young yeshiva boy, I used to look for someone who will be kind enough to pass the mishloach manot to a third person, and sometimes it comes out a bit strange and a bit funny. So you don't have to make things odd or rude, but if it's possible to send through someone else. With my wife, it's sometimes that my wife gives me the mishloach manot, and I'm giving it to the person that we want to give it, and then I said my wife sends the mishloach manot, and the second mishloach manot is the opposite. I give to my wife, and my wife says that Natan is sending the mishloach manot. So that's how we sort of do it in a messenger kind of way. And the last point here, as we underlined, it should be on the same day. There's no use giving mishloach manot after Purim. It's a Purim thing for the meal of Purim. We have 1 minute left, and we have a few other things to talk about. So I think we won't stress the time. Next week, I was planning to have a bit more of a spiritual discussion, talking about the content of the Megillah and about the essence of Purim. But I think we will start next week with finishing the practicalities of Purim. And then when in the second half of the shiur, we will get a little bit into the meaning of the Megillah, because this is part of the mitzvah, to understand what we are reading. So to read a little bit of the Megillah and to understand the story. But in the beginning of next week's shiur, we will finish these practicalities first. So Shavua Tov, thank you very much for everybody. I hope it was helpful and meaningful. And we will meet each other next week. And until then, don't forget to prepare your costumes, also for yourselves.
Thank you.
שבוע טוב, תודה.
Thank you. Good talk.
Thank you. Shavua tov.
Shavua Tov.